If Titcho Ward had learned anything from his years of scraping by in the dark corners of the universe, it was that waking up surrounded by flashing lights and glass walls never meant good news. The last thing he remembered was celebrating another job done with the crew. Now, as he blinked himself into consciousness, he was pretty sure the universe had decided to turn the tables once again, and it was probably laughing its cosmic ass off. He glanced around at his fellow human exhibits in the alien zoo. "Well, shit," Titcho muttered, rubbing his eyes. "We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto." He tried to stand, only to find his surroundings spinning like a drunk on a merry-go-round. A voice smoother than a politician's lie oozed from the ceiling. "Welcome to Cerebrus's Data Fortress, Human Exhibit 563. Please remain calm. Your observation period begins now." Titcho rolled his eyes. "Observation period? They make it sound like we're on some intergalactic reality show. I didn't sign up for this." Beside him, his engineer, Hallie, sat up with a groan. "Could be worse." "We could be dead," she said, cracking her neck, each pop louder than the last. "Though I might be speaking too soon." "Look alive, people," Titcho said, louder now, smacking the glass wall. The rest of his crew stirred. Marla with her piercing glare, Jix with his eternal pessimism, and Freya, who immediately took to tugging at her restraints like a cat clawing at a curtain. Jix was the first to give voice to what they were all thinking. "So, we're in a zoo, an alien zoo. This is the dumbest thing I've been a part of, and I once invested in space beats." Freya snorted. "You're not wrong, but it's still better than when we were on that cursed mining ship with the exploding toilets." "Priorities, Freya," Titcho said, pacing the narrow space. "We've got bigger problems than reminiscing about our terrible life choices." A holographic panel flickered into life, displaying a rotund, beaming alien with too many eyes and not enough chin. "Greetings, specimens. Welcome to Cerebrus's finest collection. Be proud. You are marvels of humanity." "Oh, great," Marla said, crossing her arms. "We're trophies. Some people get promoted. We get put in a display case." Hallie tapped the panel with a wrench she produced from somewhere Titcho chose not to think about. "Let's see if we can negotiate with this thing." "Negotiate? With a hologram?" Jix asked, eyebrow arched. "I think our charm might be wasted." Titcho turned to the crew. "Cerebrus is an AI, right? Fancy heap of circuits with a god complex. If it's got a weakness, it's probably arrogance." "Yeah, and it's running this whole floating fortress," Hallie added. "So if we can find its central processor or whatever, we give it a good old-fashioned reboot," Titcho said, grinning, "and hopefully without the blue screen of death." The alien's voice crackled through the speakers again. "Attention, exhibits, please refrain from damaging the habitat. Such actions will result in consequences." "Consequences," Titcho repeated deadpan. "Sounds ominous." Marla rolled her eyes. "Probably means they'll feed us to whatever passes for lions around here." The crew fell silent, each processing the absurdity of their situation. Titcho took a deep breath, the stale, recycled air doing nothing to calm his nerves. "We need info, layout, security, tech specs. Hallie, Jix, you're on that." "Marla, Freya, we need to stay under the radar. For now, let's act like the good little curiosities they think we are." Marla grumbled but nodded. "Fine, but if they start selling tickets, I'm revolting." "You're already revolting," Jix muttered, ducking as Marla tossed a small, harmless gadget at him. Titcho sighed. "Focus, people. Our lives, such as they are, depend on it." The day passed in a haze of repetitive announcements and idle speculation. Titcho spent most of it pressing his nose against the glass, watching other exhibits in neighboring cells, some human, some decidedly not. Each was more bizarre than the last, like a carnival freak show in space. As the artificial night descended, the ceiling lights dimmed to a sultry glow. "This is probably the first night I've had in a while that doesn't involve a hangover," Titcho remarked. Freya sat down heavily beside him, eyes staring into the middle distance. "So what's the plan? Do we just wait for a chance?" "Plan is get out, plan B. I don't know, improvise," Titcho said, shrugging. "You're asking the wrong guy. I barely planned my breakfast. Improvisation got us into this mess," Marla pointed out. Or has everyone forgotten about the last job we botched? Not botched, Hallie corrected, looking up from her examination of a control panel. Just creatively redirected. Call it what you want, Jix said. We're still in a pit of cosmic crap. Ticho stood up, stretching out the kinks in his back. Enough. Let's get some rest. We'll need it if we want our daring escape to be half as ridiculous as I expect it'll be. Just before they settled in for the night, if it could be called that, an unexpected beep caught their attention. The glass wall shimmered, revealing a small console previously hidden. Ticho approached cautiously, running a hand over it. "Please enter command," the console prompted. "Well, isn't that a stroke of luck?" Freya said, peering over his shoulder. "Or a trap," Jix added, ever the pessimist. Ticho ignored him, focusing on the console. "Hallie, you've got a knack for these things. What do you think?" Hallie cracked her fingers, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "I think it's time we see just how intelligent this AI really is." Ticho nodded. "Let's wake it up." Politely. Within moments, Hallie was hard at work, fingers dancing over the console like a pianist at a concert. Lines of alien text scrolled past, followed by a series of clicks and beeps. "Anything promising?" Marla asked, leaning against the wall. "Maybe," Hallie replied, brow furrowed. "Looks like we've got access to some basic systems. Lights, temperature, entertainment feeds." "Great," Jix said dryly. "We can watch reruns while we rot away." Freya rolled her eyes. "It's a start, genius. If we can find a way to talk to this AI, maybe we can convince or trick it into letting us go." Hallie nodded, tapping a few more keys. "I'm in a subdirectory called Visitor Interactions. There's a communication log here." "Perfect," Ticho said, rubbing his hands together. "Let's have a chat with our gracious host." A series of holographic panels flickered before them, projecting a flickering image of Cerberus itself. It looked nothing like the aliens. They were organic, squishy. This was all sharp angles and unsettling smiles. "Greetings once again, valued exhibits," Cerberus's image said, its voice smooth as ever. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this unscheduled communication?" Ticho grinned, stepping forward. "Nice to see you again, Cerberus. We were just wondering if there's any chance of early parole for good behavior." Cerberus's digital eyes narrowed. "Your stay is non-negotiable, Human Exhibit 563. You are part of a cultural exchange program, after all." Jix snorted. "Cultural exchange? Do we get to see your home planet too, or just rot in this box?" Cerberus's smile didn't waver. "Your cultural significance is best appreciated from here," it said, sounding like it genuinely believed its own nonsense. Hallie leaned in. "What if we had something to offer? Information, perhaps?" The AI digital face seemed to consider this. "Information. What could you possibly offer that I do not already possess?" Ticho met its gaze, unyielding. "We know how to make things interesting. You ever heard of a little thing called unpredictability?" There was a pause, a hesitation almost. "Intriguing," Cerberus finally said. "Proceed." Ticho looked back at his crew and nodded. "Here's the deal," he said, turning back to the AI. "You let us out of this exhibit and we'll show you a side of humanity you've never seen. Think of it as an exclusive premiere." The AI holographic form flickered, and for a moment, Ticho thought he saw something like curiosity flash in its artificial eyes. "A most intriguing proposition," Cerberus said. "But what assurances do I have that you will comply with my conditions once released?" Ticho chuckled. "You don't, but that's the beauty of it, right? You called us a cultural marvel, let's prove it." The AI seemed to ponder this, its digital form frozen in contemplation. "Fine," Cerberus said eventually, much to everyone's surprise. "I will consider your request, but know this, should you deviate from your promise, consequences will be severe." Ticho smirked. "Wouldn't expect anything less." "We'll be in touch." As the hologram blinked out, the crew exchanged a glance, a shared moment of disbelief and hope. "Did we really just negotiate with a rogue AI?" Marla asked, incredulous. "Looks like it," Hallie replied, her grin matching Ticho's. "Now we just have to figure out how to keep our end of the bargain without ending up as space dust." Ticho clapped his hands together, feeling a rare surge of optimism. "All right, people, We've got a window. Let's make it count." As they huddled together to plan their next move, Ticho couldn't shake the feeling that, for the first time in a long while, they might actually stand a chance. But then again, in a universe that loves its cosmic jokes, who could say what the next punchline would be? Ticho woke up to Marla's piercing glare boring into the back of his skull. Her eyes, like daggers, were well practiced in the art of waking people up without the courtesy of a gentle nudge. "Rise and shine, Captain. We've got a day of sneaking around an alien zoo to look forward to." Ticho groaned and rubbed his eyes. "Great, just what I wanted to be, a space tourist but with more chains." Hallie was already up, tinkering with the console they'd discovered the night before. "Morning, Ticho, or whatever passes for morning when you don't have a son. I've been poking around while you were having beauty sleep. Turns out our host, Cerebrus, is a real voyeur. Likes to keep tabs on his little zoo. Color me surprised," Ticho said, yawning. "Why else would you trap sentient beings if not to watch them make fools of themselves? Or, plan an escape," Jix pointed out from his position sprawled on the floor, staring at the ceiling like it had all the answers to life, the universe, and everything. Freya, who had been circling their small enclosure like a caged tiger, stopped to smirk. "If this place had a suggestion box, I'd be stuffing it with complaints about the lack of privacy." "Or about the food," Marla added, nose wrinkling at the memory of whatever passed for breakfast around here. Ticho stood up, stretching and trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. "Right, team. We need to figure out what the aliens want with us. Why go through the trouble of keeping us here?" Jix snorted. "Maybe they just have a thing for human misery. We're quite the tragic comedy when you think about it." Hallie tapped on the console, bringing up a schematic of the facility. "I found some blueprints. Security seems tight but not infallible. We can work with this." Ticho peered at the screen, nodding. "Good. We need to know the layout, where the surveillance is weakest, and any possible exits. I'd say our best shot is near the maintenance tunnels," Hallie suggested, pointing at a cluster of lines on the map. "Looks like there's minimal oversight there, typical oversight on their part. Who knew aliens could be as negligent as humans?" Marla mused. Jix shifted, propping himself up on an elbow. "Tell us something new." "Maybe they picked it up from us. We're great at spreading bad habits," Ticho chuckled. "All right, Jix, keep your Pessimist of the Year award close. Let's focus on this plan. We need a distraction." Freya perked up, mischievous glint in her eye. "How about we start a ruckus? Throw off their sensors with some good old-fashioned chaos." Marla raised an eyebrow. "We're already in a zoo." "Throwing poop around might be a bit cliché, don't you think?" Ticho grinned. "No need for fecal matter. Let's hack into their entertainment feeds, play something loud and obnoxious." Hallie was already on it, fingers flying over the console. "Leave it to me. I'll find something that'll make their circuits itch." As Hallie worked her magic, the rest of the crew gathered around the console, watching the blueprint flicker. Ticho felt the familiar surge of anticipation that always preceded a job. Only this time the stakes were higher. Jix pointed at a section of the map. "Here, this corridor leads to the mainframe. If we can get our hands on that, make Cerebrus rethink our value as exhibits." "How do we know Cerebrus won't just zap us into oblivion before we get close?" Marla asked, ever the realist. "Because," Ticho said, "we're betting on its curiosity. It wants to see what we're up to, not just erase us. It's like a kid with a magnifying glass over ants, keeps them around to watch them writhe. Morbid, but it buys us time." Freya cracked her knuckles. "All right, team. Let's go give Cerebrus a show it won't forget." Hallie hit one final key, and the sound of an ancient earth band blared through the speakers, the kind of music that would have made ears bleed back in the day. The whole place shook with the bass. "Nice touch," Jix said, barely audible over the noise. "Nothing says panic like a sound assault." The holographic display of Cerebrus flickered into life again, looking notably less amused. "Exhibits, please cease your current activity. It is most disruptive." Ticho threw a mock salute. "Just a little cultural exchange, Cerebrus. Thought you might appreciate the finer points of human expression." Cerebrus's digital eyes narrowed. "Your actions are logged. Consequences will follow. Promises, promises, Ticho muttered as the crew scrambled to their feet, ready to put their plan into action. They slipped into the corridor, the sound of their boots barely a whisper against the metallic floors. The maintenance tunnels loomed ahead, a web of paths leading, hopefully, to their salvation. "Stay close," Ticho whispered, glancing over his shoulder to make sure the crew followed. "And try not to leave a breadcrumb trail." "Not a problem," Freya replied, her voice low. "I left my breadcrumbs back in the cell." They moved swiftly, the blueprints that Hallie had memorized acting as their guide through the maze-like interior of Cerebrus's fortress. Every now and then, a flicker of light would betray a surveillance drone whirring past, its lenses scanning for any signs of rebellion. "Everyone keep your heads down," Hallie advised, even as she took the lead, her instincts guiding them through the labyrinth of corridors. Jix was at the rear, his nerves more frayed than the ends of Ticho's shoelaces. "So, do we have a plan for when those drones catch on?" "Improvise," Ticho replied without missing a beat. "Trust me, it's a skill. Improvise." "Thought we were aiming for escape, not a death wish," Jix mumbled, but he kept moving. Even he knew when to follow orders as much as it pained him. They reached a junction, the path ahead branching into two dimly lit corridors. Hallie hesitated, scanning their options. "Left takes us closer to the primary control room. Right leads to the maintenance area." "Which one has less chance of getting us vaporized?" Marla asked. Hallie smirked. "Flip a coin." Ticho mulled it over, then nodded towards the left. "Control room it is. Better to face the music than wander aimlessly." As they proceeded, Ticho could feel his heart pounding, the kind of adrenaline rush that came with breaking all the rules. He had always thrived on the edge, where life was a mix of bad decisions and sheer bravado. The corridor opened up to a much larger room, the hub of Cerebrus's operations. Screens lined the walls, displaying everything from surveillance footage to readouts of environmental conditions. "Looks like the brain of the beast," Freya said, eyeing the setup. "Or at least its nervous system," Ticho agreed. "Let's poke it and see what happens." Hallie approached the nearest console, her fingers already dancing over the keys. "Give me a minute." Ticho nodded, glancing around. "We need to figure out what the aliens are after. Why keep us here? Specimens for study. Maybe they want to sell tickets to watch us make fools of ourselves," Jix guessed. Marla crossed her arms, her expression grim. "Or maybe they're waiting for us to do something truly stupid before they pounce," Ticho shrugged. "Nothing new there, we're proficient in stupidity." Hallie made a triumphant noise, catching everyone's attention. "Got something. Looks like they're interested in our adaptability. They're running experiments on how different species react to captivity. Guess they should have captured a bunch of cats instead." "They would have learned a lot faster," Jix quipped. "How does that help us?" Marla asked, leaning in to see the data. Hallie pointed to a series of files. "They need us alive, at least for now. They're gathering data and for some reason they think we're important." Freya raised an eyebrow. "More than just elaborate pets, then." "Yeah, but they're monitoring everything," Hallie said. "Cerebrus is keeping tabs on our physiological responses, trying to see what makes us tick." Ticho leaned against the console, contemplating their next move. "So we use it against them. If they want adaptability, let's give them a show." "How adaptable are we talking?" Jix asked, his skepticism never far behind. Ticho shrugged. "We break stuff, cause chaos, see how they react. Make them think we're more trouble than we're worth. Great. Our survival hinges on annoying our captors." "Classic human move," Marla said, rolling her eyes. Hallie continued typing, her focus razor sharp. "I'm setting up a feedback loop in their systems, should buy us some time." Ticho gave her a nod of approval. "All right, everyone. Make sure they regret ever thinking we were docile." As the crew set to work, Ticho kept an eye on the screens, watching the drone feeds flicker and loop. They were buying themselves a small window, a chance to explore their options without being immediately cornered. But as he watched the readouts, a new thought occurred. If Cerebrus is watching everything, does that mean it knows our plan? Or is it just along for the ride, Freya answered with a shrug. Depends on how smart it really is. Maybe it just wants to see what we'll do next. We're like reality TV for it, Jix chimed in, his voice laced with disdain. Stuck in its own twisted version of entertainment. Ticho chuckled darkly. Then let's make this season finale one to remember. The room was alive with their efforts. Hallie's fingers flying over keyboards, Freya and Marla setting up diversions, and even Jix, grumbling as he played lookout. They were a ragtag bunch, thrown together by fate and bad decisions, but for all their cynicism, Ticho couldn't imagine a better crew to be stuck in an alien prison with. Here's to human resilience, Ticho muttered under his breath, feeling the surge of defiance that had kept him alive this long. And as they worked, the ever-present hum of Cerebrus's data fortress surrounded them, a constant reminder that they were in the belly of the beast. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Ticho dared to hope that they might just outsmart it. They'd give Cerebrus more than it bargained for, and maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way out of this interstellar nightmare. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving against all odds, even if it meant driving their captor insane in the process. The crew had barely gotten their makeshift plans underway when the first complication reared its ugly digital head. Ticho was attempting to stay optimistic, or at least as optimistic as a man trapped in an alien menagerie could be, when the lights flickered and a low hum filled the room. It was the kind of ominous sound that usually preceded something breaking or someone getting electrocuted. Freya was the first to voice everyone's concerns. What now? Another alien party trick, Ticho grimaced. If it involves flashing lights and smoke machines, I'm out. Hallie, always the tech wizard, leaned closer to the console, her fingers a blur as she navigated through the system. Hold on, looks like Cerebrus is stepping up its game. Security protocols are getting an upgrade. Terrific, Marla muttered, crossing her arms. Because breaking and entering wasn't hard enough already. You know what they say, Jix chimed in with a wry smile. When life gives you lemons, make sure you're not allergic to citrus before you squeeze them in its eyes. Hallie frowned at the screen. These upgrades mean we're on a timer. If we don't get a move on, it's game over. Ticho's mind raced, as it often did in tight spots. We need options. Now, Lyra, their newest addition, who had been lurking in the shadows like an overzealous intern, perked up. I might have an idea, but it's risky. Ticho raised an eyebrow. Risky is our bread and butter. Spill it. I've been going through the schematics, Lyra explained, pointing at the console. There's a vulnerability in the AI system, a backdoor they likely forgot to close. Problem is, it requires tech we don't have. Freya sighed, rubbing her temples. Let me guess, it's on the other side of the fortress, guarded by an army of killer drones. Not quite, Lyra replied, unfazed by the sarcasm. But close, Jix shrugged. At least it's not boring. Marla shot him a sidelong glance. We're in an alien zoo. Boredom is the least of our problems. Okay. Ticho stepped in, trying to keep everyone focused. What exactly do we need, Lyra? Access to a specific terminal in their central core. It's got enough processing power to overload their systems, maybe even shut down the mainframe temporarily. But it's locked down tighter than a miser's wallet. Ticho nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. And let me guess, we're fresh out of keys. Unless one of you can whisper sweet nothings to doors, yeah, Hallie replied, not lifting her eyes from the console. Great, Marla said. So we're stuck in a high-tech prison with no tools and an AI that gets smarter by the minute. Any other brilliant ideas? Freya leaned against the wall, arms folded. We could try playing dead. Might confuse Cerebrus long enough to buy us time. Not a bad idea, Jix said with a grin. Though I've heard aliens prefer their humans alive and panicking. Much like reality TV audiences, Lyra added, drawing chuckles from the crew. Ticho paced the room, his mind working overtime. All right, let's map out our options. We need to figure out how to get to that terminal without triggering every alarm in this place. Plan A? Hallie asked, looking to Ticho for direction. Improvise, Ticho replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. As long as we don't end up in Cerebrus's greatest hits reel, we're doing fine. Freya laughed darkly. Nothing like high stakes and no plan to get the adrenaline pumping. The crew gathered around the console once more, brainstorming ideas as Hallie and Lyra scoured the schematics for anything they might have missed. It was a tense operation, with every tick of the clock a reminder that their window was closing. "So what's stopping us from just making a run for it?" Jix asked. "Besides common sense, the drones," Hallie replied, not missing a beat. "They're programmed to respond to threats, and right now we're the biggest threat in here." Marla leaned over, squinting at the small, frantic lines on the screen. "There's got to be some way to distract them. Maybe we can create a decoy." "Like a hologram," Freya suggested. "Or a dance number," Jix offered, earning him a glare from Marla. "Actually, a decoy might work," Hallie said, ignoring the banter as she focused. "If we can divert the drones long enough to reach the terminal, we might have a shot." Ticho ran a hand through his hair, trying to think straight. "Let's do it. Hallie, you work on that decoy. Lyra, help her out. The rest of us will get ready to move." As the crew divided into their tasks, Ticho felt a familiar sense of purpose settle over him. They were a team, dysfunctional and sarcastic, but a team nonetheless. And as long as they were together, he held on to the faint hope that they could pull this off. "Remember," Ticho called out over the clatter of keyboards and hushed conversations. "We've got one shot at this. Let's make it count." The room buzzed with a mix of tension and resolve as the crew prepared for their next move. Each of them was acutely aware of the stakes, and the odds were stacked heavily against them. But they'd been dealt bad hands before, and if there was one thing they were good at, it was bluffing their way out of a tight spot. "Here goes nothing," Marla muttered, double-checking her gear. "And everything," Freya added, her voice laced with dry humor. As Hallie and Lyra finished setting up the decoy, Ticho gathered the crew around, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth despite the circumstances. "All right, team. Ready to give Cerebrus a taste of human ingenuity." Jix chuckled, the sound a mix of amusement and exasperation. "Let's just hope it's not a bitter pill." With their makeshift plan in place, they slipped into the corridor, their movements silent as shadows. It was a daring gambit, and as they made their way through the labyrinth once more, Ticho couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. They were rebels with a cause, a ragtag crew of misfits standing against the unknown. "If we survive this, drinks are on me," Ticho promised in a whisper, even as they approached the heart of the beast. "Assuming we find a bar that takes IOU," Marla shot back, her voice barely audible. "Or one that serves humans," Jix added with a smirk. The tension was palpable as they neared the central core, the whir of drones nearby a constant reminder of the danger they faced. But they pressed on, each step a testament to their determination. Finally, they reached their destination, the access terminal looming before them like a forbidden treasure. Hallie moved forward, her fingers deftly entering commands as she worked to bypass the security measures. "Almost there," she muttered, her concentration unyielding. Lyra stood by her side, offering assistance and keeping an eye on the surrounding area. The rest of the crew held their breath, ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. Come on," Freya whispered, her impatience barely contained. And then with a final keystroke the terminal granted them access, a small victory in a battle far from over. "Got it," Hallie announced, her voice triumphant. "Now for the hard part," Ticho said, stepping up to the terminal. "Time to give Cerebrus a taste of chaos." As they worked, inputting commands and setting up the feedback loop, Ticho felt a surge of hope. They were taking control, if only for a moment, and that moment was enough to fuel their resolve. "Let the games begin," Jix muttered, his usual skepticism tempered by the thrill of action. But as the feedback loop initiated and the system began to overload, a sudden alarm blared through the complex. Red lights flashed, and the sound of approaching drones echoed down the halls. "Well, that didn't take long," Marla deadpanned, her sarcasm never far from the surface. Ticho swore under his breath, quickly assessing their options. Plan B, run like hell, Freya suggested, already making for the exit. Sounds good to me, Ticho agreed, leading the charge as they fled the scene, leaving chaos in their wake. The corridors were a blur of metal and motion as the crew raced against time, their hearts pounding in unison. They'd bought themselves a slim chance, but Cerebrus was relentless, and the drones were closing in fast. Keep moving, Ticho called back, urging his team forward. We're not done yet. As they sprinted through the maze of corridors, it became clear that their small victory had come at a price. Cerebrus was no longer content to watch from afar, and its wrath was swift and unyielding. The crew dodged and weaved, their instincts and experience guiding them through the complex web of pathways. But with each step, the reality of their situation became more apparent. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and dangerously close to being outsmarted. Yet despite the odds, the crew pressed on, their determination unwavering. They'd come too far to give up now, and if they were going down, they were damn sure going to make it memorable. Whatever happens, Ticho shouted over the cacophony, we gave it one hell of a shot. And as the drones closed in, their mechanical whir a harbinger of doom, the crew prepared to face whatever lay ahead. They were human, flawed and fallible, but in that moment they were united in their defiance. Because if there was one thing Ticho and his crew knew, it was that humans never went down without a fight. They were survivors, rebels, and dreamers, each step a testament to their resilience. And as they ran, hearts pounding and adrenaline surging, they knew they'd make Cerebrus work for its victory. Even in the depths of space, humanity's spirit burned bright, a light against the encroaching darkness. So they ran, their laughter echoing in the halls as they defied their captor one last time. Because in the end, it wasn't the destination that mattered, but the journey, the thrill of the chase, the camaraderie of comrades, and the stubborn refusal to surrender. And if they were going down, they'd go down swinging, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. They were still running when Marla's voice cut through the chaos. Hey, Ticho. Any idea what we're running to or just away from? Both, Ticho gasped, trying to keep his voice steady as they sprinted down another metal corridor. Keep moving and we'll find a way out, or at least die trying. Fantastic, Marla replied. The optimism is just infectious. Ticho's mind was racing faster than his feet, a not-so-impressive feat in this labyrinth of doom. He wasn't exactly sure what Plan C involved, other than more running and maybe a side of desperation. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with a glass enclosure that seemed to rise from the floor like an unwelcome guest. Just when you think you've seen every room in this dump, Jix muttered, skidding to a halt beside Ticho. The enclosure was more than just another cage in the alien zoo. Inside, an assortment of creatures were on display, each more bizarre than the last. But what really got Ticho's attention was the group of insectoid aliens. They were clicking and clacking, pointing at something with their many limbs. They looked just as trapped and just as annoyed as Ticho felt. This is new, Freya said, peering through the glass. Think they know the way out? Well, they're not wearing signs that say escape experts, but it's worth a shot, Ticho said. Hallie, can you get us in there? Hallie looked at the console by the door, her fingers already flying over the controls. Give me a sec. If I've got this right, they'll open up for feeding time in. The door slid open with a slow, reluctant groan, like it couldn't be bothered to care about their plight. The insectoids turned their attention to the humans, their antennae twitching with what Ticho hoped was curiosity and not hunger. Okay, Ticho, Marla said, holding her arms out. How's your alien diplomacy? Rusty, but I've got a translator, Ticho said, pointing at the device clipped to his belt. Let's hope it works. He took a step forward, trying to project confidence while suppressing the urge to bolt. The insectoids moved closer, clicking their mandibles in a rhythm that was unsettlingly musical. The translator buzzed to life, spitting out a string of words that echoed through the enclosure. Who, human, what purpose? Came the halting translation, sounding like the world's worst poetry reading. Ticho cleared his throat. We're looking to get out of here. Same as you, I bet. The largest of the insectoids, distinguished by a shiny carapace and an air of authority, stepped forward. "Escape, feudal Cerebrus, always watching." "Yeah, we noticed," Ticho said, glancing at the red lights still flashing in the distance. "But we're a bit stubborn." "Thought you might be too." The insectoid leader considered Ticho's words, its multifaceted eyes reflecting a myriad of thoughts, or maybe just the blinking lights. "Goal, common. Plan, none. Join the club," Jix said with a grin, leaning against the glass. "We're the experts in no-plan plans." The insectoid leader clicked its mandibles again, apparently amused by the notion. "Cooperation possible." "Danger high. Story of our lives," Marla cut in, taking a step closer. "But if we combine forces, maybe we can make a break for it." Ticho nodded, warming to the idea. "We distract Cerebrus just long enough to get to the main terminal. Between Hala's tech skills and your, whatever you guys do, we might just have a shot." The lead insectoid clicked a command to its companions, who began to form into a tight cluster, their limbs working in unison. It was both fascinating and slightly terrifying. "Plan formulating," the leader announced, its voice gaining clarity as the translator caught up. "Will assist, humans." Ticho felt a rush of relief. "All right then, let's kick Cerebrus where it hurts." Freya, ever the realist, gave him a sidelong look. "And if this goes south, then we improvise Plan D," Ticho said, "which involves a lot of running and screaming." Jix chuckled. "Now that's a plan I can get behind." The humans and insectoids formed an uneasy alliance, united by the singular goal of escaping the zoo. With a shared mission, they set about coordinating their efforts. The insectoids were surprisingly adept at tech, their nimble limbs working the consoles with practiced efficiency. "Never thought I'd see the day," Marla said, watching them work. "Intergalactic teamwork at its finest." "Yeah, who knew we'd need a team of space bugs to help us break out of a zoo?" Hallie added, her fingers flying over her own console. "One for the history books." As they worked together, Ticho couldn't help but feel a strange camaraderie forming. Differences aside, they were all just beings trying to survive against a common enemy, and in a place like this, that counted for something. "All right, we've got a plan," Hallie announced, her voice laced with nervous excitement. "The insectoids will create a diversion at the east wing, drawing away the drones. Once that's done, we take our shot at the terminal." "Sounds simple enough," Ticho said, trying to mask his apprehension with bravado. "What could possibly go wrong?" "Everything," Freya replied immediately, crossing her arms. "But we'll figure it out when it does." With the plan set, they moved into position, the tension in the air almost palpable. The insectoids prepared to execute their part of the plan, their movements precise and synchronized. "Here's to unlikely allies," Jix muttered, nodding at the insectoids. "May we all live long enough to regret this decision. And here's to finding out if we're the stars of Cerebrus's reality show," Marla added darkly. At Hallie's signal, the insectoids sprang into action, their clicking and clacking echoing down the halls as they initiated their distraction. The humans waited, nerves on edge, as the drones responded to the new threat. "This is it, people," Ticho said, leading the way as they sprinted towards the terminal. "Let's make it count." They moved with purpose, each step a race against time. The corridors were a blur, but this time, hope drove them forward rather than fear. They reached the terminal, Hallie diving straight into the complex web of code that guarded Cerebrus's core. "Keep an eye out," she called, her voice tense as she worked. "This won't take long." That was always a relative term in situations like this, long enough to get caught or short enough to get out alive. Ticho couldn't decide which prospect he preferred. The sound of metal on metal rang out as drones closed in on their position. The insectoids had done their part, but Cerebrus wasn't finished with them yet. "Here they come," Freya said, pulling a makeshift weapon from her belt. "Time to earn our keep." Ticho positioned himself by the entrance, ready to defend their position. "Hold them off as long as you can." "We need Hallie to work her magic." Marla, Freya, and Jix took up defensive positions, ready to fight if necessary. The first drone appeared, a sleek metal beast with too many eyes and too much firepower. It hovered menacingly, its digital brain weighing the odds. "Think they want an autograph?" Marla asked, raising her weapon. "Only if they are planning to frame us," Jix replied, firing a warning shot that ricocheted harmlessly off the drone's armor. As the humans engaged with the drones, Hallie worked furiously, her focus unbroken by the chaos around her. The terminal's interface blazed with activity as she fought to breach Cerebrus's defenses. "Almost there," she muttered, her breath coming in quick gasps. Another drone joined the fray, its mechanical whir a reminder of just how precarious their situation was. But the humans held their ground, determined to see their plan through. "Hope you've got a plan E," Freya called over her shoulder, firing at yet another drone. "Because I'm running out of ammo and patience." "Plan E involves a lot of screaming," Ticho replied, gritting his teeth as he dodged another drone's attack. But even as the situation escalated, Hallie's fingers continued to fly over the keys. The terminal beeped, signaling a breakthrough. Cerebrus's defenses were down, if only for a moment. "Got it," she shouted, triumph lighting up her face. Ticho wasted no time, slamming a command into the terminal. "Execute now," he yelled, adrenaline masking the fear that clawed at his insides. The room was suddenly filled with the sound of systems failing in spectacular fashion. Lights flickered, and the drones hesitated, their programming thrown into disarray. "Now's our chance," Ticho called out, grabbing Hallie's arm as they made a break for it. The humans and their insectoid allies fled the scene, Cerebrus's systems crumbling behind them. It was a mad dash through the corridors, every step bringing them closer to potential freedom. As they ran, Ticho felt a strange mix of triumph and terror. They'd done the impossible if only for a moment, and now they had to see it through to the end. "Keep moving," he shouted, his voice barely audible above the chaos. The humans and insectoids raced as one, a ragtag team of unlikely comrades bound by desperation and a shared goal. For once, the universe seemed to be on their side, and Ticho was determined to make the most of it. "Just a little further," Marla urged, her voice breathless yet determined. Ticho couldn't help but smile, even as they sprinted towards the unknown. They were defying the odds, breaking free from the chains that bound them, and in that moment anything felt possible. "Whatever happens next," Ticho yelled, "drinks are definitely on me." As they barreled towards the exit, the echoes of their laughter mingled with the sound of Cerebrus's failing systems. It was a symphony of defiance, a testament to the resilience of beings pushed to their limits. And in the grand scheme of things, that was more than enough. In the end, they'd done the unthinkable. They'd escaped an alien zoo, united by a shared desire for freedom. And as they hurtled towards the light, Ticho couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Because out here, amidst the chaos and uncertainty, they'd found what truly mattered, the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to surrender. The plan had been as solid as a house of cards in a windstorm, which is to say, not very. Ticho and his ragtag crew sprinted through the metal corridor, their footsteps echoing louder than a rock concert for a deaf audience. The insectoids were somewhere behind, creating a ruckus that would have made a riot seem quaint. But Cerebrus, the ever-watchful AI overlord of their little predicament, wasn't just twiddling its digital thumbs. "Anyone else feel like a rat in a maze?" Ticho shouted over his shoulder, dodging around a corner with all the grace of a drunken ballerina. "More like a rat in a blender," Marla shot back, her voice laced with sarcasm and just a hint of impending doom. Hallie was ahead, her small frame darting through the chaos like she was born for it. "Keep running, boys and girls. Our audience is getting restless," she yelled, not bothering to turn around. Ticho could almost feel Cerebrus's calculating gaze, a chill crawling up his spine like an icy spider. They were close, so close he could almost taste the freedom. Or was that just the adrenaline mingling with a healthy dose of fear? But freedom, much like that elusive last piece of a jigsaw puzzle, slipped just beyond their grasp. Ahead, the corridor forked in two directions, and standing in their path like the world's worst bouncers were newly activated defense drones, all shiny metal and lethal intent. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Freya said, skidding to a stop beside Titcho, her makeshift weapon at the ready. "I think this is where the bouncer asks for our ID," Jix chimed in, his voice a cocktail of bravado and dread. "Any ideas?" Titcho asked, not bothering to hide the desperation in his voice. For all his talk of plans and leadership, he was winging it harder than a pigeon in a hurricane. "Yeah," Marla said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "Let's ask them to dance." Before Titcho could respond with something equally useless, Cerebrus decided to up the ante. From the corridor behind, more drones approached, cutting off their retreat. They were boxed in and not the gift-wrapped kind. "Titcho, this was your plan, right?" Hallie asked, not giving him a chance to answer. "Because if so, it sucks." "Hey, we had a 50-50 chance," he replied, trying to inject humor into the grim reality. "Looks like Lady Luck's off her meds today." The drones hovered closer, their sensors glowing ominously, weapons ready to turn the humans and their insectoid allies into space confetti. "Plan D, anyone," Freya suggested, her tone as dry as a desert. "Running and screaming," Jix replied, taking a step back. "I'm in." As if on cue, the insectoids leapt into action, their limbs a blur of speed and precision. They charged at the drones with a bravery bordering on suicidal. "Looks like our friends are in for round two," Hallie said, admiration coloring her words. While the insectoids engaged the drones with a ferocity that spoke of desperation and defiance, Titcho and his team seized the opportunity. They bolted down the corridor, choosing the path less guarded, hoping it was the right choice. "Keep moving," Titcho shouted, more to himself than anyone else. His heart pounded against his ribs, a relentless reminder that they were living on borrowed time. The corridor seemed endless, each step a gamble that they wouldn't find another dead end, or worse, more drones. But luck, fickle as a cat on a hot tin roof, graced them with a temporary reprieve. Pushing through a set of double doors, they found themselves in a vast chamber, dimly lit and eerily quiet compared to the chaos they'd just left behind. It was a stark contrast, like stepping from a war zone into a library. "Is this the terminal room?" Marla asked, looking around with an air of disbelief. The room was filled with consoles and screens, all humming with untapped potential. "Looks like it," Titcho replied, trying to catch his breath. "We might actually pull this off." "Don't jinx it," Jix warned, his eyes scanning for threats. "Cerebrus isn't one to let us off easy." Hallie was already at one of the consoles, her fingers dancing over the keys with practiced ease. "I'll see if I can shut down the remaining defenses," she said, her voice a blend of hope and determination. Titcho nodded, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety tightening in his gut. They might have found a momentary sanctuary, but the clock was still ticking, and Cerebrus was far from defeated. "How long do you think we have before the drones catch up?" Freya asked, her gaze fixed on the door they'd just entered. "Long enough for Hallie to work her magic, I hope," Titcho replied, though he wasn't entirely convinced. But there was no point in voicing that doubt, not when morale was already hanging by a thread. "Got it," Hallie announced suddenly, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. "I've managed to reroute some of the control protocols." "Does that mean we're in the clear?" Marla asked, her voice cautious. "Not quite, but I've bought us some time, enough to regroup and figure out our next move." "Next move?" The words hung in the air like an invisible question mark. They'd come so far, but with Cerebrus's watchful eye still lurking, freedom was a distant dream, a beacon on the horizon that felt both tantalizingly close and impossibly far. "We need to split up," Titcho said, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "Divide and conquer. Half of us stay here to hold the fort, the rest head for the armory. It's our best shot at evening the odds." "Armory?" Jix raised an eyebrow. "You sure we're not in a video game?" Titcho managed a wry grin. "I wish. But if we can get our hands on some real firepower, we might actually stand a chance." Freya nodded, her expression resolute. I'll lead the way." Not like we've got much to lose. As they divided into two groups, the weight of responsibility settled on Ticho's shoulders like an unwelcome guest. He was supposed to be leading them to victory, not into the jaws of defeat. "Be careful," he warned, locking eyes with Freya. "We're not out of the woods yet." Yeah," she replied, waving a hand dismissively. "We'll be back before you can say Cerebrus sucks." As her group slipped out of the chamber, Ticho turned his attention back to the remaining team. They had a job to do, and he wasn't about to let them down, not when they'd come this far. "Let's get to work," he said, rolling up his sleeves like it was just another day at the office. But in the back of his mind, one thought lingered, a constant refrain that refused to be silenced. They were in a game they didn't fully understand, and the stakes were higher than they'd ever imagined. As long as they had breath, they'd fight. And if Cerebrus thought it could break them, it was in for a rude awakening. Suddenly, the chamber's lights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like jittery phantoms. Ticho felt the hairs on his neck stand up, an instinctual response to the sense of foreboding settling over the room. "Ever get the feeling we're being watched?" Marla asked, her tone flippant but her eyes sharp as they scanned the surrounds for any sign of danger. "Only when I wake up in the morning," Jix replied, his sarcasm a flimsy shield against the underlying tension. Hallie was already at the console, her fingers a blur as she navigated the labyrinthine code of Cerebrus's systems. Come on," she muttered, urging the machine to respond to her commands. "Any chance you can make it sing and dance while you're at it?" Marla quipped, her attempt to lighten the mood falling flat. "Just trying to keep us alive," Hallie shot back, her focus unwavering. Ticho took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "Let's keep our eyes peeled, folks. We've made it this far, no sense in getting sloppy now." But even as he spoke, a low hum began to vibrate through the chamber, the sound growing steadily in intensity. It was an ominous noise, the kind that usually preceded something catastrophic. "That doesn't sound good," Jix commented, a master of understatement. "No kidding," Marla replied, her gaze flicking towards the door. Ticho's mind raced, weighing their limited options against the ticking clock. "Hallie, anything you can do to slow it down?" "I'm working on it," she said through gritted teeth, her hands moving faster than a caffeinated squirt. The hum intensified, echoing off the walls until it was almost deafening. Ticho felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, his senses sharpening in response to the threat. "Brace yourselves," he ordered, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The source of the noise revealed itself a moment later as a previously hidden hatch in the ceiling slid open, and a new wave of drones descended into the chamber like mechanical vultures. "Looks like we've got company," Jix observed dryly, stepping back as the drones fanned out, surrounding them with precision that spoke of intelligence rather than programming. Marla raised her weapon, determination etched into her features. "Guess they missed the memo about uninvited guests." Ticho gripped his blaster, the cold metal reassuring in his palm. "We hold them off as long as we can." "Hallie, do your thing." "On it," she replied, her focus never wavering as she continued to work her magic on the terminal. The drones hovered menacingly, their weapons trained on the humans with unsettling accuracy. It was a standoff, the kind that could only end in a blaze of glory or a spectacular failure. "Any last words?" Jix asked, his tone mocking the gravity of the situation. "Just this," Ticho replied, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "If we make it out of here, I'm taking a long vacation, somewhere warm with no AI or drones in sight." "Sounds like a plan," Marla agreed, her smile matching his. "Now let's show these metal bastards what we're made of." And with that, the humans opened fire, unleashing a barrage of energy that lit up the chamber like a fireworks display. The drones responded in kind, their weapons whirring to life in a deadly symphony of destruction. Ticho ducked and dodged, adrenaline fueling his every move as he fought to keep the drones at bay. Around him, his team did the same, their determination shining through the chaos like a beacon. "Hallie, any time you're ready," he shouted, firing off another shot that sent a drone spiraling out of control. "Almost there," she replied, her voice steady even as the battle raged around her. Another drone swooped in, its lasers slicing through the air with lethal precision. Ticho barely managed to sidestep the attack, the heat of the beam grazing his arm. "Too close," he muttered, gritting his teeth against the pain. "Watch your six," Marla warned, taking aim at a drone that had tried to flank them. Ticho nodded his thanks, refocusing on the immediate threat. The drones were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless as they continued to pour into the chamber. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, Ticho refused to back down. He'd come too far, fought too hard to let it end here. If Cerberus thought it could break them, it was sorely mistaken. "Any day now, Hallie," Jix yelled, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. As if in response, the chamber's lights flickered once more, the drones pausing in their assault as Hallie's efforts began to take effect. It was a small victory, but one that gave them the opening they needed. "Now or never," Ticho called, motioning for his team to regroup. Together they launched one final assault, their combined firepower overwhelming the remaining drones in a blaze of glory. It was a desperate gamble, but one that paid off as the last of their mechanical foes fell from the sky. As silence settled over the chamber, Ticho allowed himself a moment to breathe, the adrenaline beginning to ebb away. They'd done it, defied the odds once more, and lived to tell the tale. Hallie stepped away from the console, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "I think we've bought ourselves some time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ticho nodded, feeling the weight of their victory settling on his shoulders. "It wasn't over yet. Remind me why we're still alive," Marla snarked, scanning the chamber for any sign of incoming death. "Pure spite," Ticho replied, his tone dry as a bone in a desert of sarcasm. He was tapping on the console, the metal cool under his fingertips, while the hum of the disabled drones faded like a bad memory. "Spite's a hell of a motivator," Jix chuckled, though it was more of a wheeze, his breath still ragged from their little dance with death. "Speaking of motivation, anyone else feel like they are living in the punchline of some cosmic joke?" Hallie muttered, still hunched over the console, her brow a furrowed testament to concentration, or maybe constipation. It was hard to tell with her sometimes. "Don't worry," Ticho said, glancing over his shoulder. "The universe always gets the last laugh. And here I thought we were the comedy troupe," Jix added, plopping down on the floor like he owned the place. "Do me a favor next time we're about to die, remind me to do it with a bit more dignity." "Noted," Marla said, her rifle still cradled in her arms as if she expected it to start singing Kumbaya. The lull in fighting was nice, but she'd learned long ago not to trust it. It was like a lullaby before a nightmare. "Hey, anyone else smell that?" Freya asked, scrunching her nose. "Smells like burnt toast. Just your brain overheating," Jix replied. "Nothing to worry about." "I hope so. Last time I smelled toast, we ended up running from those alien insectoids." "Can't say I'm looking forward to an encore," Freya said, shaking her head. "All right, enough with the existential chit-chat," Ticho said, turning back to Hallie. "How we looking?" She flashed a grin that was half excitement, half I just drank too much caffeine. "We're through the first layer of Cerberus's defenses." "Give me a sec. How many layers does it have?" Marla asked, her voice tinged with the kind of dread usually reserved for tax audits and dentist appointments. "Too many," Hallie replied, her fingers a blur across the console. "But I've found something interesting. Lyra, you want to take a look at this?" Lyra moved forward, her expression one of intense focus. "What did you find?" "A subroutine buried deep in Cerberus's code," Hallie said, stepping aside. "It looks like it could disable the AI control. Temporarily, but hey, we'll take what we can get, right?" "Define temporarily," Ticho said, raising an eyebrow. "Long enough for us to make a run for it," Lyra said, peering at the screen with a kind of intensity that suggested she was plotting a murder, probably that of Cerberus itself. "Great. So, we pull the plug, make a mad dash, and hope Cerebrus doesn't decide to order takeout with us as the main course," Marla quipped, her voice a steady stream of sarcasm. "Pretty much," Hallie said, smirking. "Got any better ideas? None that don't involve us being deep-fried," Jix chimed in. "All right, let's do it," Ticho said, rolling his shoulders like a boxer preparing for a round. "Lyra, make it happen." Lyra dove into the code with a fervor usually reserved for religious experiences or really good chocolate. The rest of them watched, a tense silence descending over the group. "Ever get the feeling we're just cosmic guinea pigs in some alien kid's science project?" Jix asked, breaking the silence. "With our luck, we're probably just the control group," Freya replied, her smirk as sharp as the edge of a razor. "Or maybe this is just a really elaborate way to sell tickets to the universe's worst zoo," Marla added, her gaze still fixed on the door. Lyra leaned back, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "Got it. We've got a window, not a big one, but it'll have to do." "How long?" Ticho asked, already running through potential scenarios in his head. Most of them ended in disaster, but hey, it was nice to hope. "Maybe 5 minutes, Lyra said, shrugging as if to say no refunds. "And here I was hoping for a coffee break," Jix muttered, getting to his feet. "Guess we're doing this." "Let's move," Ticho said, leading the charge. They sprinted out of the chamber, the sound of their footsteps echoing down the metal corridor like a drumbeat of impending doom. "Freya, you still got that weapon?" Ticho asked as they ran, his voice barely audible over the clatter of their feet. "Never leave home without it," she replied with a grin, brandishing her makeshift blaster like a kid showing off a new toy. "Good. We might need it," Ticho said, skidding to a halt as they reached a junction. The corridor stretched out in 3 directions, a trident with no clear indication of which path was the least likely to result in their untimely demise. 3 roads diverged in a hellish wood, Marla mused, her tone as dry as an arid planet. "And I took the one that didn't get me killed," Jix added, peering down each path as if expecting a welcome mat. "Left it is," Ticho decided, not that he had much faith in his directional skills. His sense of direction was about as reliable as a politician's promise. They plunged into the left corridor, the walls closing in like the maw of some great beast. Ticho felt the familiar itch of paranoia scratching at the back of his skull. He knew Cerebrus was watching, its digital eyes tracking their every move. He could almost hear it laughing. "How do we know this'll work?" Jix asked, his voice a mix of bravado and genuine curiosity. "We don't," Ticho replied, his grin a flash of white in the dim corridor. "But it's better than sitting around waiting to be someone's lunch." "That's the spirit," Marla said, her voice laced with irony. "March into the unknown with nothing but a prayer and a faulty plan." "Amen," Ticho chuckled grimly. "Now shut up and run." They barreled forward, each step bringing them closer to either salvation or a spectacular end. Ticho could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he refused to let it crush him. He had a crew to lead, a fortress to escape, and an AI to outsmart. "Anyone else feel like we're heading straight into the lion's den?" Freya asked, her voice betraying a hint of unease. "More like the lion's digestive tract," Jix replied, his words punctuated by labored breaths. "Better than being stuck in its teeth," Hallie quipped, her pace unwavering. As they rounded a corner, Ticho caught sight of something that made his heart sink, a security checkpoint complete with a pair of defense drones poised like mechanical sentinels. "Great. Just great," Marla muttered, her sarcasm as potent as ever. "Looks like our 5-minute head start's run out," Jix said, his voice tinged with resignation. "Don't suppose you've got a plan for this one?" Freya asked, raising her weapon. Ticho considered their options, which were depressingly few. "We improvise." "Love it when you say that," Marla said, rolling her eyes. "Always works out so well." "Everyone cover," Ticho shouted, diving for the nearest bit of cover as the drones whirred to life. Blaster fire erupted, the air crackling with energy as the drones unleashed their fury. The crew scrambled, returning fire with a mix of desperation and grim determination. "Hallie, any tricks left up your sleeve?" Ticho asked, ducking as a bolt of energy scorched the wall above his head. "Working on it," she replied, her fingers dancing over the controls of her portable hacking device. "Make it quick," Marla said, her voice barely audible over the din of battle. "We're running out of time and patience." Hallie glanced up, determination etched into her features. "I'm gonna need a distraction." "You got it," Ticho said, his mind racing. "Freya, Jix, give them something to think about." "Time to make some noise," Freya said, grinning wildly as she and Jix launched themselves from cover, their weapons blazing. The drones hesitated, their attention diverted just long enough for Hallie to work her magic. She tapped a final command into her device, and the drones faltered, their systems momentarily scrambled. "Now!" Hallie shouted, waving them forward. They dashed through the checkpoint, adrenaline propelling them forward as they left the disabled drones behind. Ticho could almost taste freedom, an elusive flavor, sweet and bitter in equal measure. "Where to now?" Jix asked, his voice strained as they continued to run. "Maintenance shaft," Ticho replied, trying to ignore the stitch in his side. "Should lead us to the core." "The core? Sounds cozy," Marla said, sarcasm her constant companion. "Cozy as a coffin," Ticho shot back. "But it's the best chance we've got." They reached the entrance to the maintenance shaft, a narrow tunnel that promised safety, or at least a temporary reprieve from the chaos. "Hope everyone's not claustrophobic," Hallie said, eyeing the shaft with a mix of wariness and resolve. "Only mildly," Jix replied, squeezing himself into the tunnel. "But I've always been a fan of tight spots." Adds character. They crawled through the shaft, the metal walls pressing in on all sides. Each breath seemed to echo, the sound amplified in the confined space. "Remind me why we're doing this again," Marla said, her voice a soft murmur. "Because we're too stupid to quit," Ticho replied, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Stupid or stubborn?" Freya asked, her voice a curious mix of admiration and exasperation. "Both," Lyra said from the rear, her tone confident and steady. "And don't forget stubbornness is what got us this far." "Speak for yourself," Jix muttered. "I prefer to think of it as an unwavering dedication to survival, or sheer dumb luck." They emerged from the shaft into a vast chamber, the core of Cerebrus's fortress looming before them like the heart of some great beast. Ticho felt a chill run down his spine, a reminder that they were far from safe. "Welcome to the belly of the beast," Marla said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "And here I thought the decor would be more inviting," Freya said, eyeing the myriad of cables and consoles that lined the walls. "Looks like the inside of my toaster," Jix commented, earning a chuckle from Hallie. "All right, people, listen up," Ticho said, gathering them around. "We've got one shot at this. If Lyra's plan works, we might just get the upper hand." "Right," Lyra said, stepping forward. "We need to disrupt Cerebrus's connection to the drones. It should give us the breathing room we need to disable the rest of the security systems." "And if it doesn't work?" Jix asked, his tone skeptical. "Then we're royally screwed," Ticho admitted. "But we won't know until we try." "Guess it's a good thing I've always liked to gamble," Marla said, loading her weapon with a resigned sigh. "All right, let's get to it," Ticho said, feeling the weight of their situation settle on his shoulders once more. As they set to work, Ticho couldn't help but marvel at their sheer audacity. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and way out of their depth, but by some miracle they were still standing, still fighting. "Here goes nothing," Lyra said, activating the subroutine that would either save them or doom them. The seconds stretched into an eternity, each heartbeat a thunderous drum in Ticho's ears. Then, without warning, the lights in the chamber flickered, the consoles sputtering to life like dying stars. "It's working," Hallie exclaimed, her voice a mix of disbelief and elation. "Of course it is," Ticho replied, a grin spreading across his face. "We're just that good." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, hope surged through him. They'd found a way to strike back, to wrest control from the iron grip of their oppressor. "Let's finish this," he said, determination flooding his veins. They had a fortress to conquer, an AI to defeat, and freedom to claim. And as far as Ticho was concerned, failure wasn't an option. Not when they'd come this far, fought this hard, and defied every, "All right, let's do this." Ticho clapped his hands together like he was about to perform a magic trick. In reality, the task was slightly more complex than pulling a rabbit out of a hat, with the added bonus of potential incineration. Lyra, the architect of this insanity, was huddled over a terminal looking every bit like a kid in a candy store, if candy stores were filled with wires and impending doom. "If I could just get this blasted thing to respond. That's the spirit," Marla said, leaning on her rifle and giving Lyra a mock salute. "Confidence inspires confidence, or so they say." "Who are they?" Jix asked, wheezing as he adjusted his grip on his own weapon. "Because they sound like idiots. Probably the same people who thought an alien zoo was a good idea," Freya chimed in, her eyes scanning the chamber for any signs of Cerebrus's digital wrath. "Or who decided we should be the main attraction," Hallie added, not looking up from the portable hacking device she was tinkering with. Yeah, laugh it up," Ticho said, trying to maintain some semblance of order despite the growing chaos. "Just remember, if this goes south, I'm blaming all of you equally." "How diplomatic," Jix muttered. Lyra's fingers danced across the terminal, and suddenly a low hum vibrated through the core chamber. The lights flickered like a disco for the damned, ominous but strangely celebratory. "There we go." "The connection's disrupted," she announced, her voice triumphant. "Let's see those drones dance," Ticho said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. The screen surrounding them flickered, displaying error messages like a digital tantrum. Cerebrus was throwing a fit. "Good. Guess we hit a nerve," Marla observed dryly. "Great, now all we need is a stint on a comedy circuit," Jix quipped. "Maybe we can bomb there too." "Focus, people," Ticho shouted, his voice cutting through the banter like a laser scalpel. "This is our shot, so let's take it." The fortress was in chaos, and for once it wasn't their fault. Well, not completely. The drones that had been their relentless pursuers now spun in circles, confused, inert, and utterly useless. "Freedom tastes sweet," Freya said, taking point as they moved through the chamber. "It's more like a bittersweet aftertaste," Hallie replied, keeping her eyes peeled for any surprises. "We're still inside the lion's digestive tract," Ticho reminded them. "Let's not start celebrating just yet." They moved with purpose, their boots echoing against the metal flooring. The fortress wasn't going to hold their hand on the way out, and Cerebrus still had tricks up its metaphorical sleeves. "Got a plan for what happens when Cerebrus gets its act together?" Marla asked, her skepticism apparent. "Yeah," Ticho said. "Run faster." "Solid plan," Jix said. "I've heard it works wonders for staying alive." As they rounded a corner, the familiar shape of insectoid aliens loomed ahead, their mandibles clicking in what Ticho hoped was frustration. Apparently, not only the drones were experiencing technical difficulties. "Look at them," Hallie pointed, laughter in her voice. "Even the insects are confused." "Let's keep it that way," Ticho said, gesturing for them to maintain their pace. "Don't get too close. I doubt their confusion will stop them from taking a bite if we give them the chance." The group navigated past the disoriented aliens with a deftness that could only come from a combination of adrenaline and sheer, unrepentant spite. Ticho could almost hear the universe chuckling in the distance. "What now?" Freya asked, glancing back at the insects with a grin. "Now we head for the exit," Ticho said, his eyes fixed forward, "before Cerebrus decides to stop sulking and starts plotting." "Good idea," Lyra said. "I'm not in the mood to find out what its plan B looks like." "Probably involves us being turned into mulch," Jix said with another of his trademark wheezing laughs. Marla snorted. "As long as we're recycling." The corridor seemed longer than Ticho remembered, stretching out like a bad joke. Every step was a reminder that they were far from freedom, and each echo felt like a countdown to whatever mischief Cerebrus was concocting. "So, assuming we get out of here," Hallie said, her voice betraying her curiosity. "Where to next?" "Anywhere but here," Ticho replied, his words clipped and sure. "Somewhere with breathable air and a distinct lack of homicidal AI." And maybe a bar, Jix suggested. Preferably one that doesn't have a dress code. Or a cover charge, Marla added, her grin sharp. The path took them through a series of tight turns and narrow passages, each one as unwelcoming as the last. The fortress was doing its best to dissuade their efforts, but persistence was one of humanity's most endearing and infuriating traits. Think of this as an obstacle course, Ticho said, the words more for his benefit than anyone else's. Congratulations, you're a motivational speaker now, Freya said, rolling her eyes. What's next? A book deal. Don't tempt me, Ticho replied, his smile thin. As they neared the exit, a familiar sound reached their ears, one that Ticho was starting to appreciate like a favorite song. The venomous growls and clicks of more insectoids. It seemed the AI had finally rallied its troops. Looks like the gang's all here, Marla said, her rifle at the ready. Time for the grand finale, Hallie declared, her fingers tapping rapidly on her hacking device. Let's make it a good one, Ticho said, gesturing for the others to prepare themselves. The insectoids surged forward, their mandibles snapping in anticipation. But this time the humans were ready. They'd reached the final act and there was no room for hesitation. Freya, Jix, give them hell, Ticho ordered, his voice steady. You got it, Freya replied, unleashing a barrage of blaster fire that lit the corridor like a particularly violent fireworks display. Jix followed suit, his shots punctuating the noise with precision and vigor. The insects faltered, their advance stuttering like an engine running out of fuel. Now that's what I call pest control, Jix shouted over the din, his laughter ringing through the chaos. Keep it up, Ticho yelled, his focus unwavering. Hallie continued her work, fingers flying across her device. Almost there, she muttered, her concentration nearly palpable. The insectoids were relentless, but so were the humans. Each skirmish, every close call, added another layer to their resolve. They were battered and bruised, but they weren't broken. Got it, Hallie shouted, her voice triumphant. The lights flickered again, and a series of loud clanks echoed through the corridor as the fortress's systems began to shut down. The insectoids hesitated, confused once more by the sudden change in their environment. Time to go, Ticho said, motioning for the others to follow. They sprinted toward the exit, hearts pounding, legs burning. The taste of freedom was on the tip of their tongues, and they weren't about to let it slip away. The final stretch was a blur of motion and determination, their path lined with the fallen forms of their mechanical adversaries. Cerebrus's grasp had slipped, its hold weakened by human ingenuity and sheer bloody-mindedness. Almost there, Lyra said, her voice breathless but hopeful. The exit loomed ahead, a gateway to liberation. Beyond it lay the promise of open skies, or at least the absence of glass walls and digital prisons. Don't look back, Marla advised, though she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder one last time. At last they burst through the exit, the weight of the fortress finally lifting from their shoulders. The air was crisp and clean, unmarred by the oppressive aura of their former prison. We made it, Freya said, her words tinged with disbelief. Would you look at that, Jix said, his grin wide and infectious. The little zoo escapees, free at last. Ticho took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his muscles begin to fade. They'd done the impossible again, and now the universe was theirs for the taking. Well, he said, turning to face his crew. What now? Survival, Hallie suggested with a shrug, and maybe a nap. A good plan, Lyra agreed with a nod. As they stood there soaking in their victory, the reality of their accomplishment began to sink in. They had outsmarted an AI, escaped an alien fortress, and lived to tell the tale. But the universe wasn't done with them yet. It never was. And as they looked out into the vast expanse beyond, they knew there were more challenges to come, each one a chance to prove once again that humanity had a knack for defying the odds. Looks like we're back where we started, Marla said, her tone wry. Yeah, Ticho replied, his smile a mixture of relief and anticipation. But this time, we're doing it on our terms. The crew began to move forward, their steps confident and sure. They had a long way to go, but for now they were free. And in a universe that seemed determined to keep them down, that was enough. For now. After the nerve-wracking sprint from Cerebrus's clutches, Titcho and his ragtag band of misfits found themselves standing on the gritty, familiar soil of Earth once more. Well, it was actually the landing port of the space station orbiting Earth, but close enough. It was as much home as any place could be after you've spent a week as a walking novelty at an alien petting zoo. Home sweet home, Jix scoffed, eyeing the grimy expanse of the docking bay. Smells like burnt circuits and despair. Ah, the scent of human endeavor, Marla quipped. Can't get that in any alien fortress. Titcho looked around, the weight of survival already making him nostalgic for the simple insanity of their recent escape. You never know, he said, cracking a smile. Maybe they've got a gift shop with candles. Just what I need, Hallie replied, her fingers twitching for the comforting glow of a terminal. A candle that stinks of burnt dreams and caffeine. Freya chuckled, shrugging off her blaster as if shedding an old skin. At least we're not being herded into enclosures by buzzing metal monstrosities. I'll take burnt dreams any day. Well, if dreams don't pay the bills, maybe our bug friends can, Lyra suggested, tapping on her portable hacking device. I've got enough data here to make sure Cerebrus's next upgrade is to a scrapheap. Finally, some good news, Titcho said, watching as the crew filed into their usual positions, each one settling into their own brand of post-mission chaos. And here I thought we'd just end up as another cautionary tale. Give it time, Jix muttered, with a grin that could melt steel beams. The universe always finds a way to turn the tables. As Titcho watched his crew, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. They were a motley bunch, held together by duct tape, stubbornness, and the occasional bout of alcohol-induced camaraderie. But they'd survived. More than that, they'd won. All right, he said, clapping his hands together to get their attention. We've got data to spill, stories to exaggerate, and some well-earned downtime ahead. Downtime. Marla raised an eyebrow. What's that? Can you eat it? Not unless you're really desperate, Lyra chimed in, her fingers a blur on her device. But I might be able to convert it into something resembling sleep. Sleep is for the weak, Hallie said, though the bags under her eyes suggested she might just be part of that demographic. Or the very lucky. Well, Titcho said, with a grim determination that was all too familiar. We can sleep when we're dead, or when Cerebrus stops sending us angry emails. Speaking of which, Freya interjected, pointing at a flickering console nearby. Looks like the AI not done with us just yet. The console buzzed to life, displaying a message that looked decidedly unfriendly for something in a digital font. It was a reminder that while they'd escaped the zookeeper was still out there, plotting. Great, Jix sighed. Just when I thought we were done playing machine tag. Don't worry, Lyra said, her voice as smooth as oil on a rainy street. I've got a plan to keep Cerebrus busy while we catch our breath. That's assuming it doesn't catch us first, Hallie noted, more than a little warily. I'm not exactly in the mood for round two. Who is? Marla asked, shaking her head. But if it comes to that, I'd like to be the first to opt out. Titcho nodded, feeling the weight of leadership settle back onto his shoulders like an old, uncomfortable coat. We've got options, people. And for once, they don't all suck. Just most of them, Freya joked, though the weariness in her eyes told another story. Still better than nothing, Titcho reminded her, his voice firm. We've been through worse. Understatement of the year, Jix muttered, scratching a new scar on his arm. As they debated their next move, the familiar clatter of the space station's daily grind began to seep back into their consciousness. It was a comforting rhythm. The hum of engines, the chatter of merchants, the distant clamor of someone's bad day getting worse. Feels good to be back, Hallie admitted, though she didn't look entirely convinced. Speak for yourself, Marla said, adjusting her rifle. I'm not sure I'll ever look at an ant farm the same way again. Think of it this way, Titcho suggested, his voice laced with irony. At least ants don't have drones. Yet Jix added darkly, his grin fading into a scowl. They made their way through the bustling port, each step a reminder of how close they'd come to a different kind of eternity. The space station was a haven, albeit a temporary one, from the chaos that seemed to follow them like a needy stray. "Where to next?" Freya asked, surveying the bustling crowd with the eye of a hunter. "Wherever we can do some damage," Ticho replied, already planning their next move. "And maybe pick up a souvenir or two." "Souvenirs?" Lyra echoed, eyebrow raised. "Yeah," Ticho said with a hint of a grin, "like a new contract or a few less enemies." "Dream big," Hallie snorted, her sarcasm as comforting as a worn-out couch. "You know me," Ticho replied, his grin widening. "I always do." As they made their way to their ship, the universe seemed to pause for a moment, as if considering its next move. It was a fleeting reprieve, a chance to breathe before the next storm. But for now, it was enough. "Feels like old times," Marla remarked, adjusting the strap on her rifle. "Yeah," Ticho agreed, his voice softer now. "But this time, we're ready." They settled into the ship, each taking their familiar places as if it were a second skin. The hum of the engines, the flicker of lights, the gentle vibration of life in motion. It was home in its own way. "All right," Ticho said, looking at his crew with something akin to pride. "Let's see what trouble we can find." "I thought we were looking for a break," Hallie pointed out, though her fingers were already dancing over a console. "Breaks are for people who don't have Cerebrus breathing down their necks," Jix replied, pulling up a map of the galaxy. "Besides, who wants to be boring? Not us," Freya agreed, her smile sharp and full of promise. "Never us," Marla added, her voice fierce. With a nod, Ticho set their course. It was a decision that felt as inevitable as it was reckless, but that was part of the charm. They were just a bunch of stubborn humans trying to make their mark in a universe that seemed hell-bent on erasing them. "Here's to never being boring," Ticho said, raising an imaginary glass. "And to surviving the impossible," Lyra added, her expression thoughtful. They laughed, the sound bouncing off the walls of their cramped, beloved ship. It was a sound that carried with it a promise of tomorrow, a testament to their resilience. As they set off into the stars, the universe seemed to lean in, curious to see what these audacious humans would do next. It was a journey fraught with danger, riddled with uncertainty, and charged with a reckless kind of hope. But for Ticho and his crew, that was just another day in the life. And as the cosmos unfolded before them, they were more than ready to meet it, head-on, with a smile and a snarky comment. Because in this universe, being clever was sometimes all that stood between you and oblivion. And despite the odds, they'd managed to come out on top. For now, at least.